Welcome to another episode of Executive Sessions, where we discuss trends and developments in the industrial manufacturing sector. I'm your host, Clayton Gullett, and we've got an awesome show lined up for you today. There are several key trends currently that are driving manufacturing in the United States and Europe, and one of them is infrastructure. That's why infrastructure is one of MiddleGround's key thesis areas, meaning that they've developed their expertise in infrastructure investing. In today's episode, we'll discuss infrastructure investing and trends defining the space, such as wastewater management, renewable energy, and the energy grid, with the help of my guest today. To my right is Ryan McComb, the managing director of the transaction team at MiddleGround Capital and the leader of the infrastructure thesis. My God, what a title. Welcome back, man.
Thanks. Good to be back.
Yeah, how you been?
I've been good.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad. Ryan's been good. And to my left, we've got a new guy. First time on the show. It's Sir David Walden, the director of the transaction team at MiddleGround Capital. What's up, man?
Hanging around.
Yeah, just hanging around. There you go. You heard it here. All right. Well, you guys ready to talk about infrastructure, Steve?
Love to.
Do it.
All right. First question. This is open to both of you. Why is infrastructure such a key industry for manufacturers today?
Yeah, I mean, I would jump in and say that, I think infrastructure is a key industry for manufacturers today because there's really many B2B industrial businesses that touch every part of the economy when it comes to an infrastructure perspective, right? I mean, you've got a lot of different trends emerging, not only in renewables, but T&D. You've got roads and bridgeways that need replacement, water and wastewater is a key area. And so there's just a lot of different manufacturing companies that kind of touch every facet of these end markets. And not only kind of, the core products, but there's many of the businesses out there you don't think of that create specific widgets that go into an end application that kind of fuel the infrastructure trends.
Fantastic. So somebody watching this might think, well, these trends would be primarily beneficial bridge builders or those directly related to infrastructure. But how do these trends in infrastructure ripple out across all types of manufacturing companies?
I think we've done a bunch of work around this, and I would say generally for the entire country, the infrastructure is just bad and old. And
for sure.
So, yes, there's bridges, but there's so much more to it than just like the major products or projects. And to Ryan's point, I think you kind of run the supply chain back from like the bridge builders and a lot of, components that are going into that benefit, infrastructure product manufacturers.
Fantastic. What are the key drivers for growth in infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, I think David just alluded to it. I think there's different pockets of the infrastructure, kind of investment landscape, and there's different drivers within those different pockets, right? And so, like water and wastewater, for instance, is an underinvested infrastructure in water and wastewater that leads to a lot of water waste per year. There's regulations in water and wastewater that are driving kind of the need for clean water and investment in that space. And in that market in particular, as population continues to grow, it's not going to get any better. In the renewable space, it's a push for a more sustainable environment, as well as technology adoptions. As for solar in particular and wind, the levelized cost of energy has actually become cheaper than natural kind of or like nuclear or other kind of older type dirtier energy sources, and so that's driving a major push there. And then I would say in the T&D space, it's really the adoption of new technologies as well in terms of AI, data centers, crypto mining, electric vehicle charging stations. And so it's putting all these new strains on our power grid that is driving the need to kind of replace the old systems that were already there.
Okay, so one thing I do want to touch on is talking about government policies that support tax breaks for manufacturers and infrastructure, like the Inflation Reduction Act from 2022, for example. What's the impact on the industry?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a boon for the industry. The ITC tax credits and the Inflation Reduction Act that were put in place are positive tailwinds. I would say that it's taken a little bit longer for domestic manufacturers of those types of products to benefit from those tax incentives. I think it was 18 months from when it was announced to when the actual, I's were dotted and T's were crossed with regards to what EPC firms actually needed to do to qualify for these tax credits. And so we're just starting to see that funding really trickle into the infrastructure market.
What are the trends that MiddleGround's thesis is currently focusing on in infrastructure, and why were they selected?
So there's a number of trends: water and wastewater, transmission and distribution, and renewables. And it's one of the things we've done this now across a number of theses where we bring on an advisor and we do one of these 500-page reports, and we develop the thesis with them. Hey, what are the major trends we should be investing behind? Where's the growth? But also, where's there opportunity for us as a manufacturing investor? There's a lot of infrastructure funds that own bridges, that own toll roads. That's not us. We're doing the actual manufactured products, and so we work with these advisors to say, okay, where should we be investing? And these were the couple of kind of mega trends that stood out the most.
Digging more into the sustainability piece, Ryan, can you share more about a portfolio company that MiddleGround is invested in that falls into this category?
Yeah, so Attala Steel would be the prime example there. We acquired Attala Steel back in December of 2020. They manufacture I-beams that actually go into the overall utility scale solar project. It's the foundational support products that hold up the solar panel. So kind of back to our point earlier, you wouldn't think, you think about solar, you're not thinking about the guy that's cutting, punching, grinding, and galvanizing metal that's actually going into the overall solution, right? That's kind of a perfect example of how there's a lot of different B2B industrial companies out there that are supplying kind of the widgets and nuts and bolts that go into the overall solution.
So what do you think are specific operational challenges within sustainability?
Yeah, I would say I mentioned earlier on this podcast that, the ITC tax credits, were announced in 2022. However, people have really been waiting to see how that funding proliferates through, the renewable space, right? Kind of a wait and see approach to when that funding actually gets released. And part of the major challenges right now for people in that space are, just ensuring that they're flexible with their labor, that they figure out how to take costs out of their production so they can offer better costed products to EPC firms that are dealing with high interest rates, inflation, as well as these project delays from the ITC tax credit not being able to be fully realized right now.
Yeah,
I would say another thing, and we just got off the phone, Ryan and I, with a banker talking about infrastructure and kind of the release of the funding. And I think one of the hard things is demand planning for a lot of these businesses, because there's a lot of differing opinions about how much funding of all of these major government stimulus packages, how much has been released, when it's going to be released, because to Ryan's point, you're trying to plan labor and there's labor shortages and all these issues. So I think that's another kind of major challenge.
Okay. Well, actually, on that note, what would be some practice takeaways for business owners in this industry to improve their planning and operations? Because, like you were just talking about, it's really hard to plan for future demand.
I think one of the things that we've seen that's been most impactful. Ryan and I both work on Lindsay Precast. We rolled out this 25 by 25 initiative a couple of years ago, and Lindsay Precast is a great example where, we've done a lot of stuff operationally, and the gross margins are up several hundred basis points from when we bought it. But at the same time, I forget what the lowest minimum wage was when we bought the business, like $16 an hour or something. And I think we're now at 23. We should be at 25 by next year. So despite increasing wages for the lowest earners, gross margins still up, but most importantly, at the same time, voluntary turnover is down 80%. So part of it is keeping skilled labor, which is a part of that's every manufacturing business is struggling with that.
Yeah, we've had some guests on the shows and talking about labor shortages and just people just not wanting to work in the manufacturing industry nowadays. So I could definitely see how that continues to play a role. It just goes to show you that the worker does have more power than you think. But let's move on to water and wastewater management. Can you answer the same type of question?
Yeah. So for water and wastewater in particular, we did a lot of studies here, and what we came to find was that the water infrastructure in the United States is significantly aged. As I mentioned earlier in the podcast, there's a lot of wasted water every year. Also, with the introduction of the Clean Water Act, there's a lot of government regulations going into making sure that water is recycled, treated, stored appropriately so that it eliminates that waste. And there's a lot of stimulus and funding going behind water and wastewater to kind of renew that aged infrastructure.
So, okay, on that note, could you give us an example of MiddleGround's portfolio company that would fall under?
David, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so that'd be Lindsay Precast.
Okay.
And I would actually take it a step further. I mean, Lindsay Precast obviously sells into that, but also Dutchland, which was the add-on that we've done at Lindsay Precast, which makes massive kind of multi-million gallon, also dollar, multi-million gallon wastewater tanks out of precast concrete panels.
Wow. Okay. Well, so within that space, what would you say specific operational challenges would be?
It's a lot of certainly labor shortages. I think with precast concrete more broadly, which, this business sells into water, wastewater, but also precast concrete in particular, as you think about, okay, well, what are the options, or, what are the different ways to get concrete, made or erected in whether it's cast in place or precast. In the context of labor shortages, in the context of lack of skilled labor, the ability in the context of a major infrastructure development, you have concrete elements to make something on site, under a roof. So you have a stable labor force. You can manage quality a lot better rather than saying, okay, we're going to go try to pour this piece of concrete in place, hope that the crew shows up, hope they know what they're doing. And then with precast, as long as you deliver on time, because you think about a massive, multi-billion-dollar infrastructure project, these precast products aren't that large in the context of the overall project. So just show up on time and you're going to win work, and precast is going to take, in theory, we think precast will take share over time, all else equal.
I mean, it makes sense because you're in a controlled environment. You can monitor everything. The quality will come out a lot better. And then you have people who aren't being affected by the elements. So they're going to be more focused. They're going to be able to just, be more present versus being out in the field, being out in the cold, being out in the extreme heat. And you always have to check your mixtures when those come in. So, yeah, I think cast in place is, it seems, like a no-brainer. You just come out and install it.
Precast.
Yeah.
Precast.
Yeah, I'm precast, not cast in place. Whoops-a-daisy. All right. Okay. All right, Ryan, let's talk about takeaways for business owners. What can they do to improve their planning and operations within this area?
Yeah, one thing that we do at MiddleGround with all of our portfolio companies is we have a labor planning tool that we implemented that really kind of looks at their production schedules and helps them flex labor appropriately. So that's definitely one area they could look at. Another item that we focus on here specifically is that we have a full automation team and automation department. And so automating some of those more manual processes where more labor is needed, would also help in situations where you hit the flex labor.
So you talked about labor planning. Do you have any specific pointers for business owners if they're whether that's a program or certain team members or some outside source that they could use?
Yeah, I really think it just comes down to working with the guys on the shop floor and the sales departments of being kind of in sync with one another to understand, how do we better forecast what the actual revenue and product mix and the total man hours are going to be needed in order to hit the revenue budget for the next quarter, and then how do we flex labor accordingly to be able to kind of optimize our margin. I think it really just comes down to planning and having the operations team and sales teams in sync with one another on how to schedule that labor.
Well said. I couldn't have said it any better myself. Okay, I got to know some of the reasons why investing in transmission and distribution infrastructure is attractive. Why would you do it?
Look, I think there was a question on here earlier about AI and data center trends and all of the stuff. I think the amount of power that, and it's a great example of as you think about infrastructure and how you define infrastructure, I think it can look a lot of different ways. And I think as we, you could argue data centers is a part of that. And it's a great example of like, yeah, we're not going to be building data centers, but like there's a lot of components. And as you go back, like down the supply chain, like to the very beginning, which is like actual power generation to power the data centers. Like I don't know what the latest and greatest forecast is around power generation. That's like growth in power generation driven by this proliferation of data centers and the data center build out. That's like, trillions of dollars or something. As part of that, we've got to upgrade the transmission and distribution network to support that. And it's not just AI; it's more broad. I mean, I think you look at all natural disasters. We as a country, we have to harden the grid, and so a part of that is transmission and distribution.
Yeah, and I'll jump in there as well. I mean, there's a couple of trends at play. Not only the proliferation of new technology that we talked about, EV charging stations, renewable power sources, data center, AI, crypto mining. So there's a lot of new strains and immense, a data center takes up a ton of energy, right? So there's a lot of new strains that are being put on the power grid that weren't being put on the power grid 20 years ago. I think another important thing is that, historically the grid was set up to really kind of send power from, one location to another location that were much shorter distances apart. And you've seen this kind of trend play out where, places that are actually producing power are much more rural areas, right? You're not going to build a utility scale solar farm right in the middle of a major city. It's going to be out in the rural area. People are moving outside of cities to more rural areas. And so you need to be able to transmit that power further distances than we used to historically, in order to be able to use that power in the places where it's needed. And so that's also kind of a major trend that's been occurring over the last 15 to 20 years, and it's been underinvested of how we build out that infrastructure to support those trends.
Yeah, the more that we start to shift over to like cleaner energy, things of that nature, like you're talking about, specifically putting more strain on the energy grid, it does make you worry. It's like, I hope that they keep up with the investments with like the energy infrastructure and so on and so forth, so that way we don't run into like issues like blackouts or like storms coming through and just absolutely just taking everything offline and decimating stuff. That would not be too great.
That would not be great at all.
Okay. How are you helping your industrial manufacturing portfolio companies mitigate rising material costs and the impact of inflation and labor shortages?
We've talked a lot about the labor shortage issue, and we talked about 25 by 25 and how we've taken voluntary turnover down. So like that's been a great success kind of across the portfolio. We gave the Lindsay Precast example, but we're doing that portfolio wide. On the inflation front, obviously the last couple of years has been challenging, but I think the benefit of having somebody like us involved, I think we're doing this simultaneously across however many 18, 19 portfolio companies at this point. And so, look, I think it comes down to just being anchored in the data. And, yes, there's an element of, inflation's up. It was up historically. We're taking the impact now. Might we need to go have a conversation with our customers about, look back pricing impact, but then also saying, okay, well, what do we, where do we think it's going to go in the future? Kind of getting ahead of that and saying, okay, well, how can we make sure we're protecting our margins in that front? So it's a little bit, backward looking and forward looking, but kind of comprehensive, always like anchored in the data and the analytics.
Yeah, and to weigh in there as well, it's the rising inflation over the last few years, as well as in combination with rising interest rates, the specifically in the infrastructure and market has caused a lot of developers to take a hard look and say, do I develop this project now, or do I take a wait and see approach to see if inflation settles down, if interest rates are reduced, so that their overall projects are less expensive? And so what we've kind of had to do with our portfolio companies to also kind of stay competitive in the market is, can you take costs out in other areas through operational levers, right? Can you get more efficient with your labor? Can you put sourcing initiatives in place so that you can reduce your spend on material costs? Can you take, energy waste out of the equation when you're actually manufacturing? And so how can you take costs out and protect your margin or improve your margin while still providing a cost-effective solution and product to the developer, so that they are incentivized to move forward with that project versus delaying that project. I think that's a really important thing that manufacturers in this sector have to be aware of.
So, okay, for like business owners who are out there who are impacted by inflation specifically, but who may be hesitant to call customers and be like, hey, we got to raise prices. What would be like tips or pointers that you would give to them when it comes to negotiating that?
Yeah, I mean, I think having good command of your data to really point to, their material costs are going up and their labor costs are going up. It's a lot easier conversation to be able to have with the customer that says, hey, this is a straight pass through. I'm not taking advantage of the situation to hit you for incremental pricing that's kind of ambiguous. But if they can actually go to the customer with clear data that says, hey, I'm only passing on to you, what the increases have been to us to actually manufacture this product versus hitting you with some adder just to take advantage of an inflationary economy.
Well said. Yeah. Okay. Another question. How has the infrastructure supply chain changed since the early days of the pandemic?
To Ryan's point, it's kind of coincided with, the Fed kind of missing the mark on interest rates and being a little slow to increase rates. So you saw inflation kind of run away. So it's been this, at first, you had inflation that was somewhat out of control, rates increase, and to Ryan's point, developers kind of saying, okay, well, I literally can't make money with, the Fed funds rate at, whatever, 5.25. And I think now it's interesting. We were talking yesterday to a company, and it's like, yes, rates are starting to come down, but it's also, developers haven't really been able to make money. Now they're like, well, shoot, I don't really want to start a project now if I know, the Fed dot plot says rates are going to come down 250 basis points over the next, 18, 24, 36 months. It's like, oh, well, maybe we'll just wait. So to Ryan's point, it's kind of like, how do you work with your developer partners that you're selling products into to say, okay, well, how can we kind of accelerate growth here rather than just saying, well, shoot, we can't really make money, or we're just going to wait on the developer because they're going to make more money if they do this project in 18 months, all else equal.
Yeah. And I would say from, to take it a step further, right, is, you've definitely seen an onshoring effect coming out of COVID since there was such great supply chain disruptions. And so, some products that you might have been sourcing from, international markets, you might be, if you're a developer in this country, looking to source domestically because project delays cause massive cost increases in installing one of these infrastructure projects, right? If you order metal from, India to build a bridge and it's delayed 6 weeks on the water versus getting it here domestically due to the COVID supply chain disruptions, that's a major cost of having work crews sit idle for like 6 weeks extra,
Absolutely. Yeah.
or 6 months extra. So that's definitely a dynamic we've seen play in since COVID. And then, also with like kind of the introduction of like the ITC tax credits, particularly in the solar end market, you've also seen, some projects source materials domestically here to qualify for that tax credit because a certain amount of content needs to be sourced domestically to qualify, but it's still been kind of slow to adopt. Specifically in the solar end market, 40% of the content needs to come from domestic sources, and solar panels are 40% of the content, and we don't have the manufacturing capacity here in the U.S. today to be able to supply enough panels for the projects. And so a lot of developers in the solar space have not actually been using domestic content products until solar manufacturing capacity can ramp up to be able to supply the panels, which we see occurring in the next 8 to 12 months.
So just out of curiosity, we were talking about the supply chain issues and kind of forcing people to look in instead of out when it comes to bringing in material supplies that they need to finish a job or keep people working. Do you think that due to inflation, there we go. Do you think that due to inflation that will start forcing people to look outside of the country again, or do you think that will impact in any way?
I don't really think that I think inflation is obviously cooling. And I think, again, like there's definitely tax incentives that are starting to be more widely understood and adopted for using domestically sourced products. And so I think that, those tax incentives will outweigh, the benefit of sourcing cheaper international goods.
All right. Well, we're almost out of time. So at the end of the show, you guys know we always have our guests give their closing thoughts. So, David, we'll start with you. Closing thoughts.
Closing thoughts. Look, I think, we have done really well with our infrastructure investments, and I think we're quite bullish. I think, one of the most fascinating elements to me is this proliferation of data centers and AI, and where we've seen it in some deals that have traded over the last 12 months, where you're like, EBITDA quadrupled and somebody paid a nosebleed multiple off of peak earnings, and you're like, wow, like the infrastructure trends there are real. And so I think, and that's true, across the infrastructure space more broadly, and I think there's a lot of growth for a lot of years to come.
Yeah, no, I'd just say that, look, we kind of were early adopters in developing our infrastructure thesis well in advance of the, IIJA or the tax credits or ITC being announced. And so we kind of started looking at this space early on. And we continue to be very, very bullish on this space, specifically in the pockets that we discussed on this broadcast, within T&D, renewables, water and wastewater. And we're excited to continue investing in this space.
That's awesome. I'm really excited to see what you all do and where things go next. Thank you all for joining us for another episode of Executive Sessions. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast on any audio streaming services and our YouTube channel. And be sure to hit that notification bell so you never miss any of the wonderful content we make. Another huge thanks to Ryan McComb and David Walden for taking time out of their busy schedules. You have no idea how hard these guys work. So thank you guys very much for being here.
No problem.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that'll do it here for us. Join us next time when we discuss more about trends and developments in the industrial manufacturing space. We'll see you then.